You know those events that change the way you see yourself and how you see the world? I'm talking about those things that happen to you that just like rock you from your core and basically change everything. I've had two of those events happen to me, and they actually both happened in April. The first happened in April of 2010 when my father passed away when I was 20 years old, and I want to share more about the second thing today. On the day that I am recording this video, it has been 5 years to the day since I had brain surgery to remove a brain tumor. I told a story about how I found out I had my brain tumor multiple times across multiple platforms, but what I haven't talked about quite as much is just how much that experience changed me as a person and the mental and emotional healing that took place while I was recuperating. Honestly, nothing brings you down to earth and humbles you like a health scare of that magnitude. It definitely made me realize how big God is and how good God is, because it was a prime example of where God can come into your life and put a comma where there could have been a period. You know, it could have been the end, but instead it was just a brief little pause, in my journey and in my story. That experience just basically made me rethink everything that I thought I knew about myself. I like to say that God blessed me with a brain tumor, and the reason that I use that term is because God really used that experience to transform me and make me a better person. So the story begins in February of 2018. My husband and I had been married for 4 going on 5 years, and we were one of those couples that wanted to experience life as a married couple before having a baby. And in February, basically one day, it seems like we both just woke up and were like, hey, you want to try to have a baby? And we were on the same page with that. And we're both people who, when we want something, we want it right then. So we jumped straight into trying to have a baby. I got off birth control, and we were really serious about trying. A few weeks after getting off birth control, I started having really bad headaches, and I always remember the first headache that I ever had. My father-in-law was visiting, and my husband was on his way back from a road trip, and I was just on the couch for most of the day with a really bad headache. And I remember my husband getting home and him and my father-in-law going out to dinner, and me being like, babe, I really can't go, like my head is killing me, I'm just gonna sit this one out. And when he came back, I was like, I've never had a headache quite like this, and the reason this one is weird is because I really feel like I can't see like out of my peripheral vision on one side. Like I can see straight ahead of me, but when I try to look, like over this way, I really can't see out of my peripheral vision. And we both thought that that was super strange. We looked it up, and it said that that can be a migraine symptom. My mom has migraines and has had really bad migraines basically my entire life. And so basically I was like, okay, I got off birth control, and the hormonal change has, sparked me having these migraines, which really sucks. The headaches were really bad though. I wasn't getting them every day, probably 2 or 3 times a week, and they were so bad that they would wake me up out of my sleep in pain. And so when we got home at the end of that basketball season, I made an appointment with my doctor and went to see her, and was basically like, yo, I'm having these terrible headaches. Basically, I just need you to give me medicine so that when they come, like, I have some relief, because they're really bad. And so after, explaining my symptoms to her and her looking at my family history, she was also my mom's doctor, so she was familiar with my mom's migraines as well. She was like, yeah, these totally sound like migraines, but let's just order you an MRI just to be safe. It's kind of our general procedure that whenever someone complains about really bad headaches, we order an MRI. Like, don't worry, these are for sure migraines, but we're just gonna take all the precautions. So I'm like, cool. I'm not really worried about it. My husband and I had a trip planned to the Bahamas that next week. We went on our trip. We had a great trip. Now, looking back, we call that trip the calm before the storm, because as crazy as it was, I had been having these consistent headaches, and then while we were in the Bahamas, I had no headaches at all. Like, the trip was amazing, to the point where I remember thinking like, oh, I bet we made a baby on this trip. Like, it was that kind of trip. We got home from the Bahamas, and a few days later, I had my appointment for my MRI. My husband came with me to my appointment, and I honestly wasn't concerned at all. In my head, I knew that these were just migraines. So I went in for the MRI, and I don't know how many of you have had MRIs, obviously, but you're in this like, this tunnel, you can't move, you have to lay back and be still. So the MRI procedure is kind of annoying in that, like, whenever someone tells you you have to be still and you can't move, of course that's when you want to move. So I do not at all enjoy MRIs, but I went in and I'm getting the MRI. So after the first scan, the MRI technician comes in and she's like, hey, your doctor didn't order an MRI with contrast, but I'm pretty sure that she's going to want one, and so I'm going to go ahead and perform an MRI with contrast, and I'm going to run and get your husband real quick. So I'm like, okay, you know, of course, whenever someone says they're gonna go get your husband, you're like, what the heck is going on? Like, that's kind of a red flag that something isn't right. But I'm still not super worried about it. I'm like, whatever. So she administers the contrast, and I have the second MRI. And basically what the contrast does is it's dye, and it helps them to really see things better. So after she's done, she calls me and my husband to the back room, which, FYI, MRI technicians are not supposed to do. I will never, ever, ever tell where I got my MRI or who the technician was, because honestly, it was very sweet of her to even, you know, go above and beyond to let us come into the back room and look at my scans before she even sent them over to the doctor. So she's like, okay, guys, she has them up on the computer, and she's like, I just wanted to show you guys what I see, just so you understand like the magnitude of the situation. If you look right here, there is something on your brain, and you know, like, I don't want you to be scared, but I also want you to, you know, make this a priority and make sure that you follow up with your doctor and get the care that you need, because there's definitely something there. So I'm like, all right. I look over at my husband. He's lost all the color in his face. I didn't even know that Black people could lose all the color in his face, but it definitely has. I am more so one of those people who, I'm very solution oriented. So I'm like, okay, like, what do I do next? And so she's like, I recommend that you give your doctor a call just to like let her know that I'm sending over the results, and that like you basically need a follow-up appointment today or tomorrow to discuss. And so I'm like, okay. So I call my doctor's office. Of course, everyone is out on lunch, so they're like closed for a little break. So I leave a message just to let the doctor know that like my scan results came back and that I wanted to talk with her about them right away. Of course, it seems like forever passes before the doctor actually calls back. My husband called my mom and let her know that like they saw something on my scan, and then the three of us went to lunch while we were waiting for the doctor to call. Honestly, I was extremely worried about my husband, because basically, like, as soon as we got the news that something was there, his whole demeanor changed. And so I really wanted my mom there to comfort him more so than me. So we went out to lunch and then went home, and the doctor gave me a call back, and she was like, hey, Allison, you know, I know that we were thinking that those were migraines, but there actually is a tumor on your brain. It looks like to me what is called a meningioma, but I have already put a call in with a specialist that can see you tomorrow to discuss further and discuss, you know, next phases of action. She's like, I'm really sorry that I didn't express to you that this was a possibility, but like I really thought they were migraines, but you know, let's stay on top of this and make sure that you get taken care of. So I'm like, okay, I have a brain tumor. And that's like the first time that it clicked that this thing on my brain was indeed a tumor. So the next day I went in and I saw a neurologist slash neurosurgeon, and he confirmed that I did have a meningioma, and he recommended, based on the size of the tumor and based on my symptoms, that the tumor come out right away. He was like, you know, since the headaches came on with a vengeance and you've been having them consistently, since you did have that one situation where you couldn't see out of your peripheral vision, like, I want this out. Like, I feel like that means that it might be growing. So let's go ahead and get on top of it. So it was on a Wednesday when I went and saw the neurologist, and he's like, I have an opening on Friday. Do you want it? Like, we can do the craniotomy and remove the tumor on Friday. And at that point, once he basically expressed that he thought it was growing, I was just like, yeah, let's get this thing out. Let's do it on Friday. I looked at my husband and my mom, who were at the appointment with me, and I was like, guys, I'm having brain surgery on Friday. And, you know, they were like, okay. And that was that. I remember that evening when I got home, I went into my bedroom by myself. I looked in the mirror and took a big, big, big deep breath, and I picked up my phone and I called all of my very best friends to let them know. Something about me and my friends, I am always and have always been kind of like that person that shows up for my friends. And by me like literally calling them and letting them know what was going on, it was basically me saying like, hey guys, like it's your turn. I need you guys to show up for me. And when I tell you guys that many of them did, it was amazing. Like so many of my friends were like, when can I come? Like, when can I fly in? Can I fly in today? Can I fly in for the surgery? Can I fly in the week after the surgery? What do you need? How can I show up for you? And that really, really was important to me, like to have them, you know, show up for me in that way. So basically Thursday was dedicated to pre-op. I had like pre-op appointments. I did a Target run to get, you know, things that I might want and need while I was at the hospital. I got comfy pajamas and slippers and all the things, you know, that I thought would help me during my healing process. And then also me and my husband packed a bag because we decided that it would be best if we all went and stayed with my mom immediately when I got released from the hospital, just so that she could also just like help out, you know, with my recovery. It was brain surgery, so I was aware that I was going to need, you know, some help for a while. And so that's what our Thursday looked like. And then bright and early Friday morning, we went to the hospital for my brain surgery. Honestly, you know, if you've ever had a serious surgery, you would probably agree. I think it's harder to be the person in the waiting room than it is to be the person that has surgery. I've been on both sides of it, and I really feel for my husband and my mom still to this day, like what they went through as the two people closest to me, you know, waiting for the doctor to come in and say that the surgery went well and that everything was okay. Surgery is risky, and anytime that you have to be, you know, put under anesthesia, obviously there's some risk, but especially when they are operating on your brain. And so needless to say, it was a lot for all of us. My husband actually doesn't even really like to talk about it to this day. I asked him if he would come in and like kind of participate in this video to tell his side of the story, and he told me no. He just said it's just too much, it's too emotional, and like he honestly doesn't want to relive it, which I respect and I get it. Like as much as it was something that I went through, it was something that he went through as well. And I will never forget him telling me about how my mom was that day. So the whole time from the point that when I told my mom I had my surgery up until ever, you know, I never saw her cry and I never saw her seem afraid. She always seemed like so full of faith and so confident that everything was going to be okay. But my husband told me that literally, like when I was in the back having my surgery, my mom was just sitting by herself, like looking straight ahead. Like she didn't want to talk to anyone, didn't want to be near anyone. She wouldn't eat anything. I found out later she actually hadn't really eaten since I told her that I had the tumor on Tuesday, and today is Friday. So she hadn't eaten in days. My husband says that when the surgeon came out and told him that they got the whole tumor and that I was in recovery and that everything went smoothly and that I was doing great, my mom literally just dropped to her knees and burst into tears and then ran to the bathroom, which we found out later that she basically got sick and threw up everywhere, you know, all over the bathroom, that she had just been like trying so hard to hold it all together for, you know, days and be strong for me and be strong for everyone else. And that's when like she finally lost it and broke. And so I don't know, like for me, you know, I basically, yes, I was a little nervous. I mean, it was brain surgery, but I basically just got to go to sleep and wake up and everything was okay. But I can't imagine what it was like for the people that love me, you know, to have to wait and have to find out like if everything was okay or not okay. So after the brain surgery, I was in the hospital for 3 days, and I will never forget that the date was April 29th, and that is also the anniversary of my dad's passing. And so during this whole thing, like just God was at play. Like that day, April 29th, is such a big day in my life. My dad passed away April 29th. Also, my husband proposed to me on April 29th, and that now here I was being released from the hospital, healthy and alive after having a brain surgery on April 29th. And so April 29th is obviously a really big day for me. So my husband and I went to my mom's house. One of my best friends was actually waiting for me when I arrived. I didn't even know she had flown in and like cooked all this food and was waiting at my mom's house for us. And basically that's when my recovery journey began. Recovery from brain surgery was about what I thought it would be. I was really weak, for probably 2 weeks and needed help doing even basic activities. Like I needed help showering and getting to and from the bathroom and all that stuff. And then after the first 2 weeks, it slowly started to get easier and I slowly started to be able to do more and more kind of on my own. Of course, I was on a lot of medication, including an anti-seizure medicine, which I absolutely hated. But apparently it's kind of a precaution that they do after you have brain surgery. It made me feel totally icky though. But I really just focused on healing and getting better. My husband left about 2 weeks after my brain surgery. He had signed a contract before we found out I had a tumor to go play in China that summer. I was supposed to go with him and he asked if he should stay, but I was like, no, I have my mom here. Like, I'm going to be pretty boring this summer. You go play, you go make us, some extra money so we can pad our savings account and let me go shopping for all the things that I want since I just had this brain surgery and I deserve them. Like, you go, I'll stay here and recover. And so after that 2 weeks, it was basically just me and my mom. And of course, she would not let me go back to my apartment. She made me stay at her house, I think until I was 6 or 8 weeks post-op. So I stayed with her for a while. And then eventually when we deemed that I was okay, she let me go home. And, the rest is kind of history. The physical recovery was what it was, but I got through it and came out on the other side. And basically since the surgery, I haven't had any major complications, no side effects, nothing like that. The only thing is that I do have to get regular MRIs every year just to be sure that the tumor hasn't returned. But what I had, a meningioma, basically is a tumor that is unlikely to come back. It's not usually a reoccurring tumor, and my doctors reassured me that the chances of it, coming back were slim to none. I do remember the day that I went in to find out if the tumor was cancerous or not. I was super scared and super anxious that day. That day was actually the day that I felt the most anxiety and the most fear of the entire process, because to me, that was okay, is this over or is this ongoing? Is this over or is this going to be something that I have to deal with long term and have to have even more medical care to really, deal with? But thank God the tumor was benign, which meant no cancer and no, I didn't need any radiation. I didn't need any chemo or anything like that. Once the tumor was out, it was out, and that was pretty much the end of it. So 5 years later, health-wise, thankfully, my brain tumor isn't really a big part of my story, but in terms of who I am, it's probably the biggest part. So much about that experience changed who I am and changed how I see my relationships and how I see the world, and just changed the person that I want to be. I've always been the voice of reasons for my family and friends, kind of that person that gives everyone advice and shows up for everyone. So much so that I got my master's degree in marriage and family therapy and actually had kind of resigned myself to making, being that advice giver, basically my career. After I had my brain surgery, I decided that I didn't really know if that was for me anymore. Basically, even though I know this is not the case scientifically and medically, for me, it felt like that mass that was in my brain, that tumor, signified everybody else's stuff and everybody else's issues and problems that I had taken as my own and carried, for so long. And with the tumor out, I basically decided that I wasn't going to do it anymore. So while, of course, I don't mean that I wasn't going to continue to be there for my family and friends and, be a good friend to people, it did mean that I wasn't going to take on other people's problems so much anymore. I felt like it just had started weighing on me so much mentally, emotionally, and even maybe in terms of my health. And so I decided that, I wasn't going to take on other people's stuff. And that meant that I had to let go of some relationships, which was really tough because I had to let go of some people that were really, really close to me. But basically what it boiled down to is that I did not want one-sided relationships anymore. So if I was constantly showing up for you, if I was constantly the person that you called to, lay all of your stuff on, but I wasn't permitted to do that, to you, I wasn't able to share with you or able to call on you when I needed something, I decided that's not a relationship that I wanted to continue. And so I had to let go of some relationships that I felt like didn't serve me, and that was hard, but it was also necessary, and it was also part of my healing. Before I had my brain surgery, I was also a perfectionist. I was a person that only wanted to show the highlight reel. Quite honestly, I feel like I was kind of raised that way. I feel like, growing up, I was kind of always expected to present this picture perfect life to the world. I mean, maybe it even goes back to me being on my Super Sweet 16. Who knows? But I definitely was a perfectionist. And honestly, like, when you have a brain tumor and a brain surgery and your friends, show up to see you while you're recovering from a surgery of that magnitude, you have no choice but to let all of your walls down. That experience quite literally forced me to let people in and let them see me who I really was, and to stop presenting perfect and start presenting real and being authentic in my journey. Honestly, when I let go of a lot of those one-sided relationships, and when I also let go of the need to seem like my life was perfect, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I felt totally transformed and just a lot lighter, like that's the one thing that I remember about recovering from my brain surgery and the mental and emotional healing that took place while I was recovering, is that at the end of that summer, when I felt like it was all said and done, I felt lighter, and I felt like this new person who was going to be real and was going to be authentic and was going to share myself with the world in a way that, inspired other people to be real and authentic too. I felt really empowered by the whole thing. The realization for me that I didn't have to present perfect and that I could present real instead was huge. And it is still who I am to this day and who I really try to be, not only personally, but also in terms of my brand. I mean, I wrote my children's book, The Kintsugi Kid, basically on just that, like inspiring children and others to embrace the parts of their stories that make them imperfect, because that is exactly what makes us unique and exactly what the world needs to see.